Welcome to the Work in Progress podcast. This is a space where we want to create conversations around things that actually matter. We hope these words encourage you to know that no matter where we are in our journeys, we're all still a work in progress. Hey, what's up, work in progress people, party people, progress people. I got a quote for you. For you, DV.
Go
for you, people.
Go for it.
Show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your future.
Come on. That's good.
That's it.
Pretty accurate.
Hey, we can wrap this up now.
It's pretty accurate.
We can wrap this one up.
No, not quite. Not quite. Today we're talking about friends, toxic friends, actually.
Toxic friends, toxic relationships, all the toxicity.
Yeah, if you haven't had a toxic friendship by now in your early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, I'm sure eventually you will have some kind of toxic relationship. Yeah. And so it's important to talk about because I find in my line of work that I get to do, hang out with students, young adults, toxic friends, man, they are so common. And people get so wrapped up in their friendships and their relationships, and they don't ever see past like tomorrow. And so I think it's important we talk about friendships because your quote is pretty accurate. Friendships do actually shape a lot of who you are. So
yeah, that's good, man.
Away we go.
You know, this was an interesting one. And as I was preparing for this, I thought about it, and I can't really recall too many toxic relationships I've had or friendships.
Well, you have to have friends.
Well, there's some. That's true. That's
just kidding.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now, there's been some relationships in my life where this may count as toxic. I don't know, but like it didn't necessarily come off as negative, but they weren't conducive to growth. Yeah, there was no growth happening in spiritual life, my walk with Jesus, or just like as a person, as a human, as a good, kind person. And so I don't know if that necessarily counts as toxic, but it definitely isn't like an ideal relationship. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, what are your toxic relationships looking like these days, bro?
Luckily I don't feel like I have any at the moment. Toxic relationships are just those that like, man, every time you're with them and you finish being with them, you just feel like worse. Yeah. Like you just feel like, man, that was exhausting. Or man, like I don't feel any better, not just about like myself, but like my self-esteem is shot. I feel like everything we just talked about was like just gossip heavy or just negative. Yeah. You know, those kind of people. And so I think the cliche example of this, like the total youth pastor example of this is like, right, you have somebody standing in a chair and somebody sitting on the floor, right? It is so much easier to pull the person off the chair than it is to pull the person off the floor. Yeah. Like, right. That's friendships. Like, right. That's your closest relationships. It's so much easier for you to be dragged down by people and they're negative and they're like, you know, self-seeking, self-loathing, whatever. It's so much easier for you to be pulled down than it is for you to pull them up. Right. Right. And so I think like, as we began the conversation about friendships and relationships, I think that's a pretty good, it's like, I mean, it's old. I think I saw that as a teenager at one of my youth groups one night. Like it's such an old cliche example, but I can't think of another, like a better visual than that. So yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that, man. I agree with that. So it's one of those weird things where like, you're so attached to maybe it's the person because you've been friends with them for a long time, or you've been dating them for a long time, or maybe it's just the idea of like hurting feelings. Yeah. But like, how do you navigate that, man? How do you get out of that if you're in it?
I think the, like when you're talking about like that, I think the thing is that we fall in love or romanticize like the idea of what that person is. Right. Like, right. Especially when you've been with somebody for a long time, like friends or whatever, like, man, maybe you started hanging out whenever you're like in middle school. Yeah. Right. And there's been a lot of change. Like hopefully you've changed from middle school, high school, college, working, adult, whatever it is. Like, right. Hopefully you've changed. I hope you're not still the same person as you were in like 6th grade. That wouldn't be super healthy. But as you change, like your friends probably also change. And so sometimes we like hold on to these things of like, oh, well, they were my best friend, or I had this idea of who they were. Right. And we hold on to those things, and that's actually not true at all. Or you've gone through like some kind of shared trauma or some kind of shared joy together. And like, you always think back to like, oh, well, like that, like I remember them at that point. And so I think like when you're thinking about this idea of like friendships, it's important to evaluate who your friends are. I think fairly regularly, not to say like, hey, we've been friends for a year, we can no longer be friends anymore. But just to evaluate like, hey, like, is this still a super healthy relationship for me to be in? Like, is it drawing me closer to Christ? Am I looking more like Christ because of this relationship? Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. So I think when we start having this conversation, there is a verse in Proverbs. I don't know where it is, right? But it talks about bad company corrupts good character.
Okay.
Right. And so, and that's something that you have to evaluate, because like if all of my closest friendships and relationships are not of good character, then like, what do you think is going to happen to my like character?
Right.
So it's important. You got to evaluate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I kind of continuing off of what I was saying earlier, like I haven't really had too many negative ones, thankfully. I have had some, I just can't remember them, but
it's good.
The ones that I do remember, like the ones that have impacted me the most have been the groups that I've been in that have lifted me up. Right. And so, you know, all things have two sides. There's never a situation where if you're in a group and they're lifting you up, then another group couldn't pull you down just as easily as you gave with the chair example. And so I like to picture this, like this like fine line between who you're hanging out with is super important as a character, because when I first started diving into our church, our community, our groups, and really just put like my best effort and full effort towards it, I noticed like I was lifting up, like it was the opposite of what we're talking about. There was no toxicity there. Yeah. Everybody was trying to become like Christ, and they were helping each other get there. And so my life improved because of that. Yeah. And so the same is true with negative friends, right? You can feel that like weight pulling on you, and your friends and your family that you hang out with outside of this group can tell the change that's happening within you. Yeah. And it's usually not a good thing that goes on. And so go ahead.
No, that was good. Something. I was going to say, like, a little side note to this is as you evaluate your friends, you should probably also evaluate the kind of friend that you are.
Yeah, that's good.
I think so. Oftentimes I've had these conversations with a couple of students over like my time working with students. And I have these people that are like, I can never make any friends. Like, I don't have any good friends. And I'm like, what kind of friend are you?
Yeah.
Right. And it sounds like kind of harsh. It's not like some kind of like transactional exchange, but I think the better friend that you are, it actually attracts better friends. Yeah. Like if you're compassionate and caring and like you're always seeking their best interests, I think you kind of attract those people. And so I think, like, just a extra side note, we weren't even going to go down this way, but as you evaluate your relationships and your friendships, I think you also need to evaluate yourself.
Yeah.
Like, am I a good friend? And if not, maybe you should check yourself a little bit. So that was just extra. That was free.
That's awesome. No, that's good. And I actually do that with work. I think I heard somebody say, like, you attract the work that you put out into the world. So why would that be any different with a friend group or like a relationship, right? Or like a significant other, if you're looking for something like that. Makes a lot of sense to me. So that's good. That was a good free tip, man. Thanks for not charging me for that one. So whenever we're in these relationships, if we notice it and we catch it, how do we exit gracefully? Because or is that the move? Are we supposed to exit? Is that the move?
Yeah, I think you have like two conversations there almost. I think a lot of times, like, we, especially like in this era, like right now that we're in, where like we're working with high school kids or college or young adults, like, right, they're always like, well, Jesus hung out with sinners, so I want to hang out with sinners. And it, like, in a way, like, okay, like I get what you're saying. Most oftentimes though, people are just saying that because they want to like live the lifestyle, and they're like, I want to do that because I want to hang out with them because they have a lot of fun. And so I think the first thing is like actually check your intentions there. Yes, you're called to like be a light in a dark world, but if all you're ever doing is just like hanging out with sinners to hang out and like, you know, bar hop and do all the things and get drunk and like party hard and treat people like garbage and like, oh, well, I'm hanging out with sinners because I want to show them the light of Christ. If you're not actually showing them the light of Christ, then you shouldn't be hanging out with sinners. Like, let's be really honest. You need to be in like a community where you're learning and growing in your own faith first. And so I think part of that is like not to just like shy away and be like, I'm going to go be a monk and like I'm going to go live at a place where all I am is surrounded by believers. I think, no, I don't think that. I think we talk a lot with our students about like the spheres of your relationships, right? Like you have this like little inner sphere. That's like your closest friends, like 2 or 3 max, like people who know you and you know them so well. I would encourage you as a believer, like your closest friends, the majority of those closest friends probably should also be believers that you're learning and growing together.
Absolutely.
Then you have the next sphere where it's like your friends, your friend group, right? Not all of your friends are going to be believers. That's okay, because you're able to actually like witness and like show them who Jesus is in that friend group. And then you have your like your larger group, which is your acquaintances. And of course there you have a big mix. But I think you need to evaluate like who you're allowing in that really deep inner circle. And so in that same conversation, like as I'm evaluating those circles deep, not so deep, and then like your acquaintances, I think you can move people in that. And I think you don't you don't ghost them and just be like, hey, we're not talking anymore.
Right.
I think you have those conversations with them. And honestly, like if they're believers, I think you just need to tell them like, hey, like I am trying to look more like Christ. I'm trying to follow after and chase after Christ. And honestly, I'm seeing things that we do together that's not healthy. And like, I'm not really about that. And if they're a believer, like that should be a pretty easy conversation to have of like, hey, like, like I want to walk with this. I want to walk through this with you.
Right.
Like, let's stop gossiping about this other person. Like,
that's good.
Let's stop doing these things that aren't actually like chasing after holiness.
That's good.
And then if it's the other people who aren't believers, maybe you just need to tell them like, hey, I'm experiencing like real life change.
Yeah.
And I'm finding there's a lot of traits that we have in our relationship that are pretty toxic. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to be your friend, but I just need to like distance myself just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's a hard conversation, no doubt, because the person's going to take offense more than likely. So you need to be prayed up. You need to have that because you're doing it with gentleness and kindness. Mm-hmm. You're not telling them like, hey, you suck and I never want to hang out with you again.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm chasing after something that maybe you're not chasing after. And that's my personal choice and that's your personal choice. Doesn't mean we can't be friends.
Right.
But you can no longer like be in this like inner circle where I'm talking to you every day. And so it's a really fine line. And I think as guys, we actually maybe have the easier way of doing this. Because I don't know about you, like I don't have really that many friends that I allow into that like deep circle. And so I'm very particular. Whereas like other people that I know, ladies that I know, like they're just super friendly. And so a lot of people feel like just that they're in this really deep inner circle and it almost is more of a struggle.
Yeah.
For some guys, a lot of ladies that I know to really like distance themselves in because they want to like really please the people that are around them. Yeah. And that's a hard place to be in. And honestly, like on that one, I'm just like, man, you got to pray a lot. Yeah. And like, you got to be really kind with your words and be gentle and, all those characteristics. It's hard. It's not an easy thing, but it's like really just, it goes back to like evaluating your relationships. And is it making me more like Christ? Yes or no? Yeah. And that's hard.
Yeah. And I think as you know, and as, maybe many other Christ followers who are listening, it's like, it's not supposed to be easy following Jesus. Matter of fact, like it's said that it's going to be probably harder doing this than following of what the world wants you to do. And that may include some friends that you have. And I like what you said about like how Jesus, some people are like, well, Jesus was friends with sinners. And it's like, well, yeah, but he was Jesus. He was perfect. Yeah. Right. And so he should be our model, but also like we should also know where our weaknesses are and where our strengths are. And I don't think hanging out with a bunch of people who are doing, the wrong things, or maybe they're not the things that are within your morals or values, are the right people to try to be around.
Or like even in that, like, right, I think of like, man, my wife and I get to do a lot of really cool stuff in our apartment complex where we're like being a good neighbor, right? And so a lot of times like we kind of get to dictate like what the circumstance looks like. And so like, it's not that we're not hanging out with people who aren't like us, but instead of like, hey, we're going to go meet up at so-and-so bar and like, we're going to go bar hop. Instead it's like, why don't you come over for dinner? Like I'll make you dinner. Sure. You can have a glass of wine or whatever, but like we're controlling that. Like we know what's going to happen in our own house that we don't have to like, succumb to like some of that stuff. Yeah. So I think like, man, if you've got like a really good friend who their tendency is to like party way too hard, then instead of like going and saying like, yeah, we're going to go party together, why don't you figure out something else to do that's like fun
that's
and that
great.
They like to do? It's not like you're not outcasting them, but you're just kind of controlling the circumstances a little bit.
No, that's well put. That's kind of what I was trying to go to. You just articulated it a little bit better. I think like you're not going to convert people in a bar, right? When the whole environment is
it's very rare.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And that reminds me of like, whenever I started doing like video work, I was at a comedy club in downtown Austin on 6th Street, right? Crazy, like 36th in the heart of it, where all the hoodlums go. Comedy clubs are notorious for having just like, mad, like it's just madness, dude. Yeah. People go there to just be raw and like unfiltered. And it's fun. Like I love comedy, don't get me wrong, but that was the wrong place for me at that time to try to evangelize, because you find yourself like just going with the flow kind of, and like enjoying what the world has to offer in a fleshly way, not necessarily a way that shows the love of Jesus. And I don't think there's anything wrong with comedy or comedy clubs. I just think it's a hard place to evangelize because everybody's there pretty much for the opposite, right?
For sure.
And so, yeah, that's a interesting concept, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think people think that they can change people's hearts.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, can you go and hang out at like a restaurant or whatever? Like, yeah, sure. Like, it's not really a big deal. Mm-hmm. Right. But there's always, like, we all know, like, there are like boundaries that you can cross over into that you're like, man, I'm actually hurting my witness. I'm actually not helping my witness. Yeah. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about like, it was a bachelor party, right? And they go to the bachelor party and they want to go like to a strip club. And this guy's like, hey, I don't do that. Like, I'm not going to go. And he's like, man, they made fun of me. And like, but I got like I think he's like, I got an Uber and like, I just went home. Like okay. Like, I'm just not going to do that. Right. He said the coolest thing is like years later, he's like, I think he said like one or two of these guys have actually like come to church and been a part of like ministry and like have learned and like are following Christ. Not saying it was that one time, but how much would that one time have like hurt the example of what a Christ follower was if you're like, man. Oh, I'm part of the bachelor party. Like, I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
And so it's like that thing. It's like, it's not saying he wasn't a part of like the bachelor weekend. Like, he still supported one of his friends and like stood in the wedding and did all that thing. He's just like, hey, I don't do that part.
Yeah. That's good.
And so that's just one of those things that like, man, you're right. Like, being a Christ follower is not always easy. Yeah. You might get made fun of, or, people may not invite you next time they go out. But again, it's like, I think we talked a little bit in our last episode of like, man, momentary suffering, air quote, it's worth it for like eternity and glory. So
small potatoes, dude. Yeah, that's
small potatoes.
That's small potatoes compared to what the future holds is in Christ.
Potato. I've never heard that one before.
Come on, small fry. You never heard that?
Small potatoes. Yeah, small potatoes, man. I agree.
Yeah.
Small potatoes.
That's right. All right. Don't overuse it, bro. Don't overuse it. Now, that's good though, man. I think this is a really good topic because it's really easy for people to just get sucked in and lost in these relationships. And it's not always the best for your spiritual health or even your just in general, like just growth.
It's such a hard balance, right? Because like, man, you get in these relationships and then you actually like back yourself out and people are like, oh, you're just being like a judgmental jerk. And you're like, no, I'm not being judgmental. Like, I literally know you. Like, I know exactly like where this is going to lead. And it's like, man, that's where I get the balance is like being kind with your words and like explaining and like giving them the way out almost of like, hey, let's just go do this instead. Yeah. That way I don't have to compromise my beliefs and I still get to enjoy this relationship as a friend with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those. And honestly, like if they're a really good friend,
they'll be okay with it.
They'll be okay with it.
Yeah.
And so.
You know what that reminds me of, dude? That reminds me of
small potatoes.
Small potatoes. I try to eat healthy. And so whenever I make these healthy choices, sometimes in like a group setting, I'm like, nah, you guys get the pizza. I'm going to grab the salad. I'm the bad guy in the situation because they're like, oh, you're going to make us eat the salad alone? I mean, the pizza alone? And I'm like, no, I'm just making the choice that I would like to make.
Yeah, I'd be like, man, I get your piece, bro. Thanks.
Exactly, bro. But no, man, and it's okay because like at the end of the day, we are accountable for our own actions, right?
Yeah,
and you have a choice in all of these things. And so,
and really good friends, really good friends are going to understand it. Mm-hmm. And if they don't understand it, maybe they're not that good of a friend to start with.
Small potatoes, bro.
Small potatoes, man.
Dude, that's the title of this episode.
That's the title of the episode, Small Potatoes. Man, I just think like, relationships aren't easy. They never were intended to be easy. It takes work.
Yeah.
Similar to like, I mean, we're both married, like, right? A good marriage takes work.
Yeah.
Like a good relationship with somebody, an imperfect person, like you're imperfect, takes work.
Yep.
Right. And some of that is like, man, I'm standing on like this. I know it's wrong. I'm not going to be seen there. I'm not going to hurt my witness, and that's okay. I think you just do it in a kind and loving way. You don't got to be a jerk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I get a witness? Amen, baby.
Oh gosh, what is this? It's going off the rails, bro. It's going off the rails.
All right, man. Spotify exclusive. I mean, YouTube exclusive.
Oh, no. Bro.
Edit that out. I'm the editor. YouTube exclusive.
YouTube exclusive. Man, we've actually appreciated, we've had people like from our church and from our circles been like, hey, when are you going to drop another episode? So thanks for like listening. Thanks for hanging out, subscribe, share. Shout out to my boy Bobby at church. He asked me a couple weeks ago, hey, when are you going to have another episode?
Let's go, Bobby.
He convicted me basically of like, man, I got to do another episode. So thank you guys for watching. That's awesome. We are trying to get into these topics. So if you got any ideas, DM us, let us know, comment on our video.
Yeah,
we love it.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it.
As always, subscribe, like, and we'll see you in the next one.
See ya.